Have you ever bought a figure in your collection that you're not satisfied with, or at least bought a figure you liked at a time, but slowly began feeling the opposite? I know I have. Quite a few times actually. There are numerous times where I impulsively bought a Godzilla figure, mostly because Japanese Godzilla figures are really hard to find where I live, at least in person. I'll be more fascinated with the fact that I found a specific character, more than the actual quality of the figure itself. Heck, sometimes it still happens to this day. This leads to some serious stinkers sitting there on my shelf alongside the figures I actually like. Unfortunately, I just have to deal with it. It's not like I could do any better. Unless... I don't show it too often, but I'm actually something of an artist myself. That doesn't mean I'm some sort of creative mastermind, trust me, I'm not. But I do have my fair share of experience. With that in mind, I've seen numerous videos in my childhood where people give their own Godzilla figures new coats of paint to make them look better than how they came. Well, I had paint lying around, and I have my methods, so I asked myself, can I save my worst Godzilla action figures? For this project, we'll be going over some of the figures I mentioned in my top 5 worst figures video, and one from the worst figures tier list. I'll also throw in a newer addition. The current roster for this video will be the SH MonsterVerse Godzilla 2004, and the Bandai movie monster series Baragon, Megalon, Godzilla 1954, and Destroyer! Anguirus and Manda 2004 were also in my top 5 video, but I have different plans for them that I want to save for a later video. Remember to subscribe and hit the bell if you haven't already to get notified when or if that comes out. We'll go through each figure one by one, talking about what I don't like about the base figure, the process of repainting it, and the final product. The overall goal of this project is to make these figures better than how they came. Whether I accomplish that or not will be up to you, the viewers, to decide. Now let's get into it. Shockingly enough, the first figure I custom painted was the SH MonsterVerse Godzilla. I started doing stop motions on my channel and wanted to paint him in a way that made him look more presentable. I talked about the serious paint chipping on the dorsal plates and the incomplete paint on the tail. I wanted it to match how it looked on the promotional pictures, and I also wanted to add my own creative liberties. I was originally going to only paint the spots where there was chipping, but decided to repaint the white entirely. Then I decided to paint the spikes along the tail, and applied some paint in areas where they weren't present before.
Kaijuzilla? Oh shoot, what's up Kaijuzilla? Dude guys, y'all gotta subscribe to Kaijuzilla, bro. Like, he made a video on SH MonsterVerse when he was talking about 2004. Like, oh my god, you just like hit the nail on the head.
Now, I could have stopped here since Godzilla finally looked like how he did on the promotional pictures. But if I was going to use this figure for stop motion, I wanted to fix some issues on the technical side, as well as add some of my own creative liberties. A major problem that the 2004 Godzilla is known for is constantly falling apart. The reissue, which is the one I have, tries to fix that problem but doesn't fully succeed. His right hand constantly fell apart, and so did his tail.
Oh shoot. See, this is what I'm talking about, bro. He just loves falling apart.
I fixed this using a super glue method that involves coating the ball joint with glue, putting it in the socket, and pulling it out before the glue dries. In theory, this should cause the joints to become tighter. In practice, the results were a mixed bag. On one literal hand, the right hand ended up pretty dang secure, allowing me to move it around without having to worry too much about it falling apart. On the other hand, I may have made the tail worse. If anyone knows any fixes for this kind of problem, please let me know in the comments. In terms of additional paint, I added a lighter gray dry brush across the entire figure, allowing the details of Godzilla's skin to be brought out. I made sure to apply extra on the underside of the tail, as well as the chest and brows. I wanted my version of Godzilla to have a closer resemblance to the Showa incarnation. With that, those are all the changes I made to this figure. Next up on the list was Baragon. In my top 5 video, I mentioned how he only had one shade of brown throughout the entire body, and a pretty bland one at that. To fix that, I decided it would be a good idea to add lighter brown to areas like his back and ears. I even used it to paint the spikes on his neck that Bandai neglected to touch. Then, I added multiple layers of black wash all across the figure, as well as some black dry washing to really bring out the muted details. I ended up having to reapply some of the lighter brown paint since it ended up getting muted in some areas. As you can see, Baragon's details are way more visible compared to the way it started, but since my skills were pretty rusty, the paint on Baragon's ears weren't the best. At the time of writing the script, I'm not quite sure how to go about fixing that just yet, but here's how Baragon turned out. It was only going to get harder from here, as the next few figures would provide quite the challenge. Coming up next was Megalon. Previously, I complained about the use of charcoal gray across the entire figure, which really didn't match the underground nature of the overall design of the character. I also brought up how some parts of Megalon's sculpt weren't painted yellow, but some were. I'd solve both problems here by 1. Applying a dirt-like brown dry brush on the gray parts of the figure, and 2. Adding yellow paint to the areas where there should have been. I had to use toothpicks to paint the yellow spots, since my paintbrushes would have definitely made it messier than it would have otherwise.
Why is he splitting? Oh, I was trying to get between his legs. Ayo? Don't clip that.
As a little extra, I added some deep red across the lining going down Megalon's torso. I was looking at reference pictures to go off of and ran into a picture of the Godzilla version of Megalon, which had the red on the linings. I'm 99% sure the original suit didn't have this, but I thought it would be cool to add, so I decided to implement it to make sure this figure stood out more. Finally, I added some silver paint on the tail spikes that were left untouched by Bandai. Here's the final product for Megalon. I'd say this is probably my favorite custom for this project. Little did I know, it was only going to get harder from here. Next in line was Destroya! A severely underpainted figure that just fails to capture the true essence of the original character. There was a lot that needed to be done in order to make this work. To start, I added some black dry brushing all across the figure to make the red look darker and the skin more detailed, just like in the movie. Then, I had to touch up on the areas that Bandai refused to paint, like untouched claws. This is where problems began to rise. You see, I was live when painting all these figures, and the white I was using didn't match the white used on the figure. What I would need to do was mix some white with a small hint of yellow to match the one on the figure. Unfortunately, I didn't have yellow paint. This led to some entertaining reactions from the chat, to say the least.
The Weasley family looks like aristocrats. Denji look rich. Oh my god. I think Homeless Gamera is basically Kai now. Okay, screw off, guys. Screw off. Black Yoshi looks like he has a billion. Ain't no way. Ain't no way. All over yo. All over. What was the reason they made a movie called -1?
Yeah, it's safe to say I would do the rest of the painting off stream. While I would end up getting yellow paint later on for Megalon's sake, I decided to just paint the claws all over again for Destroya's case. I like the pure white better, honestly. I painted all the claws black and then went over them with white to hide the original colors. I'd also use a similar method when painting things like the shoulder and the tail spikes, as well as the wings. Only this time I'd use a deep red to replace the muted reddish orange they'd use for some reason. Finally, I replaced the bright yellow horn and chest with more bone-like colors to better fit with the rest of the colors. Here's the final product for Destroya. Destroya! I do feel like the paint application could be better in some areas, but that's easily something I can work on in the future, if I don't forget. Finally, we've made it to the last figure of the selection, Godzilla 1954. Like Destroya, there was quite a bit that needed to be done in order to make it look presentable. For instance, I would need to actually paint the areas that were left untouched by Bandai, like the claws and tail spikes. I'd also need to change the color of Godzilla's teeth since they're yellow on this figure for some reason. Seriously, I'll never understand the thought process of adding colored teeth on an entirely black and white figure. I also wanted the gray base to be darker, since that's how it appears in the actual film. I could have stopped there, but I specifically wanted to take a crack at making it look like an old print version. I added some white dry brushing on areas like the chest, knees, and head, and tried to add the gradient, to varying results. I actually have really mixed feelings about this final result. On one hand, it solves problems like the teeth and lack of paint, but on the other, the execution could have been way better. But hey, if I focus too much on trying to make everything perfect, this video will never come out, so let's just leave it at this for now. Well, that was my personal attempt at improving some of the worst Godzilla figures in my collection. Did I succeed, or did I just end up making them worse? Let me know what you think in the comments, and how I can potentially improve in the future. I hope to do some more when it comes to figure customization later on. If I do, fully expect a video on it. Well, that concludes this one. Make sure to check out some of the stop motions I mentioned earlier, or just any of my other content. It really helps. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you all later, Kaiju Bros. Stomp on.